Gen Z can hold a camera steady for 15 seconds. They can't hold your gaze for 3. Watch it happen. A cashier, a teacher, a first date, the eyes flick up, then down, then away, every single time. Scientists just figured out why. And it's not shyness. It's not social anxiety. It's something happening inside the brain itself, a measurable physical change in how an entire generation processes another human face. This is the part nobody's talking about. Let's start with what eye contact actually is biologically. It is not a social nicety. It is one of the oldest, most primitive signals in the human communication system. When two humans lock eyes, something fires in the brain called the superior temporal sulcus, a region that processes social meaning from gaze direction. Within a fraction of a second, your brain is reading trust, threat, interest, dishonesty, attraction, submission, dominance. Eye contact is not a soft skill. It is a hardwired survival mechanism that predates language itself. For nearly the entire span of human history, the only way to read another person's intentions was to look at them. No text messages, no profile pictures, no emojis indicating tone, just the eyes. Humans evolved an entire neurological subsystem dedicated to processing the muscles around someone's eyes, the dilation of their pupils, the subtle shift between a friendly glance and a hostile stare. This system is ancient. It is foundational. It is quite literally one of the reasons your species survived long enough to invent the smartphone that may now be quietly switching it off. So here's the disturbing part. A generation has grown up spending more cumulative hours interacting with screens than with human faces during the exact developmental window when this neurological system is supposed to calibrate. Developmental psychologist Jian Twenge, who has spent over a decade analyzing generational shifts in behavior, found something alarming when she tracked face-to-face social interaction time among teenagers. Between the early 2000s and today, in-person socializing dropped sharply, while screen time rose to fill almost the exact same number of hours. It wasn't an addition to their social life, it was a replacement. And replacement matters because the brain doesn't just lose a habit, it loses the wiring built to support that habit. Neuroscientists describe the developing brain, particularly during adolescence, as going through a period of intense synaptic pruning. This is the process where the brain literally cuts away neural connections that aren't being used while reinforcing the ones that are. It's efficient, it's necessary, but it's also ruthless. If a teenager spends their formative years primarily interacting through screens, where eye contact simply does not exist as a variable, the brain has less reason to reinforce the circuitry required to process it in real time. This is not metaphorical, this is structural. Consider what a video call actually does to eye contact. When you're on a call, you look at the other person's face on your screen, but your camera is positioned somewhere else, usually above the screen. So while you believe you are making eye contact, the other person sees you looking slightly downward or to the side. Multiply this distortion by thousands of hours across years, across a developmental window where the brain is desperately trying to learn what real human eye contact even looks like, and you get a sensory mismatch. The brain is being trained on a broken signal. Researcher Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford's Virtual Human Interaction Lab has studied what he calls Zoom fatigue, and one of the core findings is deeply relevant here. Human brains are not built to process a grid of faces staring directly at them for extended periods. In real life, eye contact is intermittent. We glance, we look away, we glance again. It's a rhythm. But on video calls, faces are static, fixed, staring continuously, which the brain interprets as unnatural and even mildly threatening. An entire generation learned social interaction inside this distorted environment, especially accelerated during the pandemic years, when years of critical social development happened almost entirely through rectangles of light. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Even outside video calls, even in person, something has changed in how Gen Z approaches direct gaze. And the explanation isn't just screen time. It's something psychologists call social calibration deficit. Here's what that means. Confidence in eye contact isn't innate. It's learned through thousands of small, repeated social interactions during childhood and adolescence, the kind that happen at the dinner table, on the playground, in hallway conversations, In unstructured face-to-face hangouts with no agenda and no screen mediating the interaction. These interactions train the brain on subtle social cues, timing, when to hold a gaze, when to break it, how long is too long, how short feels dismissive. It's a skill, like a muscle, that gets stronger with repetition. Take away the repetitions, and the muscle doesn't develop the way it used to. A 2022 study following adolescent social behavior found that teens who primarily socialize through text-based and image-based platforms, rather than voice or face-to-face interaction, scored measurably lower on real-time social cue recognition tests, including the ability to accurately interpret gaze direction, micro-expressions, and emotional tone in another person's eyes. This is the climax of the problem. It's not laziness, it's not rudeness, it's not generational arrogance like older generations sometimes assume. It is a measurable neurological gap created by a structural shift in how human connection is mediated, and there's a darker layer underneath all of this. Avoiding eye contact isn't neutral. It has consequences that compound over time. Eye contact is one of the primary mechanisms through which humans build trust, both consciously and unconsciously. Studies in behavioral psychology consistently show that people who make appropriate eye contact are perceived as more competent, more trustworthy, more confident, even when the content of what they're saying is identical to someone avoiding eye contact. This isn't fair. It isn't necessarily accurate. But it's how the social brain works, and it has worked this way for tens of thousands of years. Which means an entire generation is now entering job interviews, first dates, important conversations, public speaking situations, carrying a neurological deficit they didn't choose and often don't even know they have. They feel the discomfort. They feel the urge to look away. But many don't understand why, and even fewer understand that it isn't a character flaw. It's an artifact of the environment they were raised in. But here's the part that should give you hope, not despair. The brain remains plastic far longer than people assume. Neural pathways that were underdeveloped during adolescence can still be strengthened in adulthood, just with more deliberate effort than it once required automatically. Psychologists who study social skill development point out that direct, repeated exposure to face-to-face interaction can measurably rebuild this circuitry over time. This is not about forcing intense, uncomfortable staring. Real eye contact and healthy human interaction isn't a fixed, unbroken stare. It's a rhythm, a glance, a hold, a brief look away, a return. Most people who struggle with eye contact aren't avoiding it because they're incapable. They're avoiding it because the rhythm was never installed properly. So the deeper truth, the real climax of the story, isn't really about screens or generations or technology being bad. It's about what gets lost when the most fundamental form of human connection gets quietly outsourced to something that can never replicate it. Eye contact isn't a soft skill. It's a survival mechanism built into the architecture of the human brain to keep our ancestors alive in a world where reading another person correctly could mean the difference between trust and danger. And right now, an entire generation is relearning a skill their ancestors never had to think twice about. Not because they're broken, not because they're lazy, but because the world they grew up in simply never gave them enough practice. The good news is the wiring isn't gone. It's just waiting, and there are specific, proven ways to rebuild it. But first, understand this. The fix is not about forcing eye contact. That backfires. Telling someone who already feels anxious about direct gaze to just look people in the eyes creates more avoidance, more shame, more retreat. The brain doesn't respond to force. It responds to repetition, to safety, to gradual low-pressure exposure that doesn't trigger the threat response but slowly recalibrates it. So here's what actually works. Start with low-stakes conversations. Practice holding eye contact with people you already feel safe with, not a stare, not an intense locked gaze, just a glance, a hold, a natural break, a return. That rhythm, glance, hold, break, return, is the real human pattern, the one the brain is supposed to learn automatically during childhood and adolescence. If it didn't get installed properly, then it can still be built now. It just takes deliberate repetition instead of accidental one. Replace some screen interaction with voice. Even a phone call, like no video, no face, just voice, still trains the brain to process real-time human tone. It's not a complete solution, but it's a bridge. And bridges matter when the gap feels too wide to cross in one step. Prioritize unstructured face-to-face time, No agenda, no phones on the table, no screens mediating. Just two people in a room, talking, existing, reading each other in real time. This sounds simple, it sounds almost too obvious to mention, but this is the exact environment the brain's social circuitry was built to calibrate inside. There is no app, no platform, no digital substitute that replicates it. Stop pathologizing it. This one is arguably the most important of all. When Gen Z avoids eye contact, the instinct of older generations is often to interpret it as rudeness, arrogance, disrespect, or social incompetence. That interpretation is wrong, and acting on it makes everything worse. Shame drives avoidance deeper. Judgment closes the very doors that need to stay open. Naming this phenomenon for what it actually is removes the moral weight from it and replaces it with something far more useful. A problem that can actually be solved. And for parents and educators specifically, the most powerful intervention isn't remedial, it's preventative. Reducing screen mediation during the critical social development windows of childhood. Prioritizing in-person play, unstructured group activity, and face-to-face conversation. Not as a punishment, not as a restriction, but as infrastructure. The same way you wouldn't let a child skip learning to walk because crawling is faster, you cannot let a generation skip the practice of direct human connection because texting is easier. The cost compounds, and by the time it becomes visible, years of critical wiring have already been left underdeveloped. The path forward isn't nostalgia. It isn't banning phones or pretending the digital world doesn't exist. It's understanding that certain things, real, embodied, face-to-face human connection, cannot be outsourced to a screen without consequence. And then building intentional spaces, habits, and relationships that put those things back into daily life before the gap becomes a permanent fixture of the next generation, too. Every conversation where you choose to look up instead of down, every moment you hold someone's gaze just a second longer than feels comfortable, every small act of genuine human attention rebuilds something ancient inside you. So the next time you're talking to someone and you feel that urge to glance at your phone, to look away, to avoid the discomfort of being truly seen, pause. That discomfort isn't weakness. It's evidence of exactly how much your brain has adapted to a world that trained it to look away. And the moment you choose to look up anyway, you're choosing to be seen and to truly see someone back.